Welcome to my channel. I hope you find this tale engaging. Let's start. I labored up the stairs, my body weary from yet another demanding shift at the hospital. The house was silent, too silent. Normally, Denise would be awake waiting for me, but tonight her absence was noticeable. "Denise," I shouted, my voice reverberating through the vacant hallway. No answer. A lump formed in my stomach as I proceeded to our bedroom. The bed was immaculate, as if no one had slept in it. Where could she be at this time? I checked the bathroom, the office, even the kitchen, nothing. As I passed the guest room, a stifled noise caught my ear. My heart pounded as I neared the door, my hand hesitating over the knob. I inhaled deeply and swung it open. The scene before me struck like a blow to the stomach. There, entwined in the sheets, were Denise and Trevor, my wife and my brother. "Denise, what the hell are you doing?" The words spilled from my lips, barely louder than a murmur. Denise's gaze met mine, icy and detached. Her expression showed no remorse or shame as she responded. "What does it look like, Luther? I've always preferred him over you." Her words wounded deeply, but I wouldn't let them see me falter. I had sensed something amiss, the tension in the home, the secretive looks they exchanged, but witnessing it was almost unbearable. "Look in the corner, Denise," I stated, my voice calm despite the inner chaos. "I've installed cameras. Our dad, Thomas, is already aware, and I've sent him the footage." Denise's face lost color, her smug look replaced by shock and fear. Trevor sat up, his eyes flicking between Denise and me. "You're bluffing," Trevor sneered, but his tone revealed his doubt. I pulled out my phone, my thumb swiftly navigating the screen. "Let's add another layer to this, shall we?" I initiated a video call, and within seconds, Denise's parents' faces appeared on the screen. "Luther, what's happening?" "It's the middle of the night." Denise's mother's worried voice filled the room. I turned the phone to give them a full view of the scene. "I thought you should see what your daughter has been doing. This marriage is done." Denise lunged at the phone, attempting to snatch it, but I easily dodged her. Her parents' shocked cries and exclamations resonated in the room. "Denise, how could you?" her father boomed, his voice heavy with disappointment and anger. I ended the call, pocketing my phone as I faced the two who had deceived me so profoundly. "You have until morning to leave my house," I declared, my tone subdued yet firm. Both of them, Trevor hurriedly dressed, pulling on his clothes. "Luther, come on, man, we can sort this out," he pleaded. I met his plea with a frigid glare. "There's nothing to discuss, Trevor. You're no brother to me." A disturbance downstairs drew our attention. Loud footsteps stormed up the stairs, and soon after, our father, Thomas Mallister, entered the room. His eyes took in the scene before him, his face twisting in fury as he faced Trevor. "You disgrace," he spat. "How dare you betray your own brother?" Trevor's face went pale. "Dad, I can explain." "What?" Thomas bellowed. "How you backstabbed your brother? How you've disgraced our family." I stood aside, watching as my father berated Trevor. Despite everything, a part of me felt justified. Thomas had always preferred Trevor, but now the truth was starkly evident. "You're no son of mine," Thomas declared, his voice shaking with anger. "You'll get nothing from me. Not a penny, do you understand?" Trevor's face twisted, his true character coming to light. "You can't do that," he yelled. "I'm your son, you can't just disown me." "Watch me," Thomas thundered. Trevor then turned to me, his eyes filled with resentment. "You think you're better than me, Luther? You've had everything given to you, but I won't go down without a fight." I met his gaze unwaveringly. "There's nothing left to fight for. Trevor, you've lost everything on your own." A knock at the door interrupted the tense standoff. I turned to see Fernando Vargas, my best friend from college, standing in the doorway. His eyes scanned the room, assessing the situation. "Luther," he said, his voice laced with concern. "I came as soon as I got your message." "What's going on?" Relief washed over me at the sight of my friend. "Perfect timing, Fernando. I could use a hand." Getting rid of the trash, Fernando stepped into the room, his presence commanding and comforting. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip steady and supportive. "You're not alone in this, Luther. Whatever you need, I'm here for you." Denise, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly found her voice. "You can't just throw us out like this, Luther." "I have rights." I turned to her, my voice cold. "Rights? You gave up your rights when you decided to sleep with my brother. Pack your things and get out now." As Denise and Trevor hurried to gather their belongings, a strange sense of calm settled over me. The betrayal still stung, but with my father and Fernando by my side, I knew I could withstand this storm. The night dragged on as we watched Denise and Trevor leave, their departure marked by silence and barely contained anger. As the door closed behind them, I turned to face my father and Fernando. "It's over," I said, my voice heavy with finality. Thomas clasped my shoulder, his eyes a mix of pride and sorrow. "You handled this with dignity, son. I'm proud of you." Fernando nodded in agreement. "What's your next move?" Luther, I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the battles ahead. "First thing tomorrow, I'm filing for divorce. And then we make sure they both pay for what they've done." As the first rays of dawn broke through the windows, I knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be challenging, but I was ready. With my father's support and Fernando's loyalty, I would face whatever came next. The betrayal had shaken me to my core, but it had also awakened something within me, a determination to not just survive this, but to emerge stronger. Denise and Trevor thought they had broken me, but they had no idea what they had unleashed. The morning sun crept through the windows, casting long shadows across the living room. I sat on the couch, my head in my hands, replaying the events of the night in my mind. The betrayal, the confrontation, the cold reality of my new situation, it all swirled together in a nauseating mix. Thomas paced the room, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. "I can't believe Trevor would do this," he muttered, more to himself than to me. My own son Fernando, who had stayed the night to keep an eye on things, leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. "People can surprise you," he said, his voice low and measured. And not always in a good way. A sharp knock at the door made us all jump. Thomas moved to answer it, but I held up a hand. "I've got it," I said, pushing myself off the couch. I opened the door to find Trevor standing there, his face a mixture of defiance and desperation. "We need to talk," he said, trying to push past me. I stood my ground, blocking his entry. "There's nothing to talk about, Trevor. You made your choice, come on." "Luther," he pleaded, his voice taking on a wheedling tone. "We're brothers, we can work this out." Before I could respond, Thomas appeared behind me, his eyes blazing with fury as he looked at Trevor. "You have some nerve showing up here," he growled. Trevor's demeanor changed instantly. The mask of contrition fell away, replaced by a sneer. "Oh, so now you care about Luther. Where was all this concern when you were always favoring me, huh?" Thomas recoiled as if he'd been struck. "What are you talking about?" Trevor laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Don't play dumb, Dad. We all know I was always your favorite, the golden boy who could do no wrong." "Well, guess what? I never cared about any of it." I watched as the truth of Trevor's nature unfolded before us. This wasn't the brother I thought I knew. I thought I knew him, but this was someone else entirely, someone driven by greed and resentment. "You think you're better than me," Luther, Trevor spat, directing his anger toward me. "You've always had everything handed to you, the perfect son, the successful doctor. But I'm not going down without a fight." I stood my ground, meeting his gaze firmly. "There's nothing to fight for, Trevor. You've lost everything on your own." Thomas stepped forward, his voice shaking with anger. "You've shamed this family, Trevor. As I've told you before, you'll get nothing from me for a moment." Trevor's facade slipped, revealing shock and fear, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, calculating, "Look, I'm entitled to my share of the inheritance." "Not anymore," Thomas declared. "I'm cutting you out of the will. Every last penny will go to Luther." Trevor's face twisted with rage. "You can't do this to me," he shouted, lunging forward. Fernando was there in an instant, intercepting Trevor and pushing him back. "That's enough," he said, his voice low and threatening. "It's time for you to leave." Trevor glared at each of us in turn, his eyes burning with hatred. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You'll regret this, all of you." As Fernando escorted Trevor out, I turned to Thomas. The anger had drained from his face, leaving him looking old and tired. "I'm sorry, Luther," he said softly. I never realized. I shook my head. "It's not your fault, Dad. Trevor made his own choices." Thomas nodded, but I could see the guilt weighing heavily on him. "I need to make some calls," he said. "Get the lawyers working on changing the will." As Thomas left the room, Fernando returned. "He's gone," he reported, "but I don't think we've seen the last of him." I sank back onto the couch, suddenly feeling exhausted. "What am I going to do, Fernando?" I asked, the weight of everything crashing down on me. Fernando sat beside me, his presence solid and comforting. "You're not alone in this, Luther," he said firmly. "Whatever you need, I'm here for you. We'll get through this together, I nodded, grateful for his unwavering support. I need to file for divorce, I said, my voice stronger now. Make sure Denise doesn't get a penny. I know a good lawyer, Fernando offered. Shannon. She's tough as nails and doesn't take any nonsense. Want me to give her a call? Please, I said, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time since this nightmare began. As Fernando made the call, I stared out the window, my mind racing. Denise and Trevor had tried to destroy me, but they had underestimated me. With my father's support and Fernando's loyalty, I would fight back. I would rebuild my life stronger than before. This was just the beginning. The road ahead would be challenging, but I was ready. Denise and Trevor had no idea what they had unleashed. I would make sure they regretted ever betraying me. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie. The face that stared back at me was different, hardened, more determined. I barely recognized myself. You ready for this? Fernando asked, appearing in the doorway. I nodded, my jaw set. More than ready. It's time to end this. We drove to the lawyer's office in silence, the weight of what was to come heavy in the air. Shannon Hayes was waiting for us, her sharp eyes taking in every detail as we entered her office. Master, she greeted, her handshake firm. I've reviewed your case. Are you sure you want to proceed with such aggressive terms? I met her gaze unwaveringly. Absolutely. Denise gets nothing, not a penny. Shannon nodded, a hint of approval in her eyes. Very well. Let's get started. The next few hours were a whirlwind of paperwork and legal jargon. Shannon moved with ruthless efficiency, closing every loophole, anticipating every possible counter move. By the time we were done, I felt drained but satisfied. As we left the office, I turned to Fernando. It's done, I said, a weight lifting off my shoulders. Fernando clapped me on the back. You did good, brother. Now let's go get a drink. You've earned it. We were halfway to the bar when my phone rang. Denise's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated for a moment before answering. What do you want? Denise, her voice came through, dripping with venom. You think you can humiliate me like this and walk away? You'll regret this, Luther. I'll make sure of it. I laughed coldly and without humor. You wanted out, Denise, now you have it, but you'll leave with nothing. This isn't over, she hissed before the line went dead. Fernando looked at me, concern etched on his face. Trouble, I shook my head. Nothing I can't handle. Come on, I need that drink. As we sat at the bar, sipping our whiskeys, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Denise's threats echoed in my mind, and I knew Trevor wouldn't give up easily. What's going through your head? Fernando asked, interrupting my thoughts. I sighed, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. I can't help but feel like we're missing something. Like there's more to come. Fernando nodded seriously. I've been thinking the same thing. Trevor's not the type to just walk away. We need to be prepared for anything. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from an unknown number, but the content made my blood run cold. You think you've won? This is just the beginning. Watch your back, Luther. I showed the message to Fernando, whose expression darkened. We need to be careful, he said in a low voice. These aren't idle threats. I nodded, a sense of determination settling over me. Let them come, I said, my voice firm. I'm done being a victim. Whatever they throw at us, we'll be ready. As we left the bar, the night air crisp and cool, I felt a strange sense of calm. The future was uncertain, full of danger, but for the first time in days, I felt in control. Denise and Trevor had unleashed something they couldn't understand. They thought they could break me, but they had only made me stronger. With Fernando by my side and my father's support, I was ready to face whatever came next. I sat in the living room with my father, Thomas, the evening shadows lengthening as we discussed the events of the past few days. The weight of betrayal still hung heavy in the air, but I found comfort in my father's unwavering support. Luther, you did the right thing, Thomas said, his voice gruff but reassuring. That woman and your brother, they don't deserve an ounce of your sympathy. I nodded. I know, Dad. It's just I never thought it would come to this. Before Thomas could respond, Fernando burst into the room, his eyes wild with urgency. Luther, we've got company armed men coming in. Fast, my body tensed, adrenaline surging through my veins. How many? I counted 4, Fernando replied, already moving towards the windows to secure them. They're well armed and look professional. Thomas stood up, his face set with determination. We need to get out of here. I shook my head. No time. We make our stand here, Fernando nodded in agreement. Luther's right. We're better off defending a known position than trying to flee. The sound of breaking glass shattered the tense silence. Fernando sprang into action, his military training evident in every move. Stay behind me, Luther. I've got this. Two men burst through the front door, guns raised. Fernando moved like lightning, disarming the first attacker with a swift strike to the wrist before driving his elbow into the man's solar plexus. The second attacker managed to get a shot off, the bullet whizzing past my ear. I tackled the gunman, using my larger frame to my advantage. We crashed to the floor, grappling for control of the weapon. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Thomas grab a heavy vase, bringing it down on the head of a third intruder, who had just entered through a side window. Luther, watch out! Fernando's warning came just in time. I rolled to the side as the fourth attacker brought a knife slashing down where my head had been moments before. Fernando was on him in an instant, his fist connecting with the man's jaw with a sickening crack. The fight was brutal but brief. Within minutes, all four attackers lay unconscious or groaning on the floor. I stood up, panting heavily, a cut on my arm oozing blood. Everyone okay? I asked, scanning the room. Thomas nodded, a gash on his forehead, but otherwise unharmed. Fernando was already zip-tying the attackers' hands behind their backs. This isn't over, Fernando, I said. The reality of the situation sinking in. He won't stop until one of us is dead. Fernando's eyes met mine, his expression resolute. Then we make sure it's him. As the adrenaline began to fade, the full weight of what had just happened hit me. My own brother had tried to have me killed. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife could. I don't know what I would have done without you, Fernando, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Fernando clasped my shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. You don't have to. We're in this together. Thomas moved to the phone, his fingers already dialing. I'm calling the police. These men will have some explaining to do. As sirens wailed in the distance, I exchanged a look with Fernando. We both knew that involving the authorities would only complicate matters. Trevor was cunning. He'd find a way to slither out of this. Dad, wait, I said, my mind racing. We need to handle this ourselves. Thomas lowered the phone, his brow furrowed. What are you suggesting, son? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. We're going to find Trevor and end this once and for all. Fernando nodded, a dangerous glint in his eyes. I'm with you, brother, whatever it takes. As the police cars pulled up outside, I knew we were crossing a line, but Trevor had left us no choice. We did as the police instructed and provided them with all the details and background. They arrested the intruders, but we knew they'd find a way out. The city's lazy police department wouldn't be much help. The next few days were a blur of activity. Fernando and I worked tirelessly, using every resource at our disposal to track down Trevor. We knew that going to the police would be futile. Trevor had always been good at covering his tracks. We need to find the source, Fernando said as we pored over maps and documents in my study. Cut off the head of the snake. I nodded, my eyes burning from lack of sleep. The hitman, if we can find him, we can get to Trevor. Fernando leaned back, a thoughtful expression on his face. I might have some contacts from my military days who can help us locate him. Hours turned into days as we followed every lead, no matter how small. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we had a name and a location. The hitman's hideout was a rundown apartment on the outskirts of town. Fernando and I approached under the cover of darkness, our hearts pounding with anticipation. Remember, Fernando whispered as we reached the door, we need him alive. I nodded, pushing down the rage that threatened to overwhelm me. With a swift kick, Fernando breached the door, and we burst in. The hitman was caught off guard, scrambling for his weapon, but we were faster. Within seconds, we had him subdued and tied to a chair. Tell us where Trevor is, I growled, looming over him, and maybe we'll let you walk away. The hitman spat at my feet, his eyes defiant. You think I'm scared of you? You have no idea what you're up against. Fernando stepped forward, his voice cold. Trust me, friend, you should be very, very scared. What followed was not something I'm proud of, but it was necessary. We extracted the information we needed, piece by agonizing piece. By the time we were done, the hitman was a broken man, but we had what we came for. Trevor was hiding out in a cabin in the woods, thinking himself safe from retribution. He couldn't have been more wrong. The drive to the cabin was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Fernando checked his weapon for the 10th time, his jaw set in determination. "Are you ready for this?" he asked as we pulled up to the secluded location. I nodded, my heart pounding. "Let's finish this." We approached the cabin silently, years of military training evident in Fernando's every move. I followed his lead, my own movements clumsy in comparison, but fueled by determination. The element of surprise was on our side. We burst through the door to find Trevor lounging on a couch, a look of shock and fear flashing across his face. "Hello, brother," I said, my voice dripping with contempt. Trevor leaped to his feet, reaching for a gun on the nearby table. But Fernando was quicker, disarming him with a swift strike. "You think this ends with me?" Luther Trevor snarled, his eyes wild. "You'll never be safe." I stepped closer, towering over him. "It ends when I say it does, Trevor. You're done." What followed was a brutal struggle. Despite his lack of training, Trevor fought like a cornered animal, his fist connecting with my jaw and sending me staggering back. But Fernando was there, delivering a precise strike that left Trevor gasping for air. I recovered quickly, my larger size giving me the advantage, and tackled Trevor to the ground, pinning him beneath me. "This is for Dad," I growled, my fist connecting with his face, "and this is for everything you've put us through." It took both Fernando and me to fully subdue Trevor. As we zip-tied his hands behind his back, I felt a mix of emotions wash over me: relief, anger, and a deep, aching sadness for what our family had become. "What now?" Fernando asked as we stood over Trevor's unconscious form. I took a deep breath, the weight of the decision heavy on my shoulders. "We turn him in. Let the law deal with him." Fernando nodded, respect evident in his eyes. "You're a better man than he ever was." Luther, as we waited for the authorities to arrive. I couldn't help but wonder if this truly was the end. Little did I know, another storm was brewing on the horizon, one that would test me in ways I never imagined. The days following Trevor's arrest were a whirlwind of police statements and legal proceedings. I thought the worst was behind us, but I couldn't have been more wrong. It started with a phone call from my lawyer. "Luther, we have a problem," he said, his voice grave. "Denise has filed a lawsuit against you. She's claiming domestic abuse and manipulation during the divorce process." My blood ran cold. "What? That's absurd." "I know, but she's got the media eating out of her hand. You need to prepare yourself for a fight." I hung up the phone, my mind reeling. Fernando, who had been staying with me, noticed my distress immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern etched on his face. I filled him in on Denise's latest attack. Fernando's expression darkened with each word. "She won't stop, will she?" he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "No, she won't," I replied, a determination settling over me, "but neither will we." The next few weeks were a media circus. Denise played the role of the victim perfectly, her crocodile tears and well-rehearsed stories of abuse painting me as a monster. "Luther Mallister is a monster," she sobbed to a sea of reporters outside the courthouse. "He abused me for years, and now he's trying to destroy my life." Because I finally stood up to him, I watched the news coverage in disgust, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. Fernando placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "We'll get through this," he said. "The truth will come out." But as the days wore on and public opinion turned against me, I began to lose hope. That's when Fernando suggested we bring in the big guns. "You need Shannon Hayes," he said one evening as we sat in my study. "She's the best lawyer in the state, known for taking down lying plaintiffs." I nodded, having heard of Shannon's reputation. "Can we get her?" Fernando grinned. Leave it to me. 2 days later, I found myself sitting across from Shannon Hayes, a fierce-looking woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. "So, Mr. Mallister," she said, her gaze piercing, "tell me everything." I laid out the whole sordid tale, from Denise's betrayal to Trevor's attempt on my life. Shannon listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing on her lips. "She thinks she can get away with this? Not on my watch." Shannon's investigation into Denise's past was thorough and relentless. She uncovered a history of lies and manipulations that stretched back years before our marriage. The day of the trial arrived, and I felt a mix of dread and anticipation as I entered the courtroom. Denise sat on the other side, her face a mask of false innocence. Shannon's opening statement was a masterpiece of legal oratory. She painted a picture of Denise as a manipulative, deceitful woman who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. As the trial progressed, Shannon systematically dismantled Denise's case. Witness after witness came forward, testifying to Denise's history of lies and manipulations. The turning point came when Shannon presented evidence that Denise had fabricated the abuse claims. Emails, text messages, and even a recorded conversation with Trevor revealed the extent of her deceit. This woman, Shannon said, her voice ringing through the courtroom, has built her entire case on lies. It's time the court sees her for what she truly is, a manipulative, deceitful person who will stop at nothing to get what she wants. I watched as the color drained from Denise's face. Her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, but it was too late. The damage was done. The judge's verdict was swift and decisive. Not only was Denise's case dismissed, but she was also charged with perjury and obstruction of justice. As the officers led Denise away in handcuffs, she turned and glared at me, her eyes filled with venom. You think you've won, Luther? This isn't over. I met her gaze steadily, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Yes, Denise, it is. As we left the courthouse, surrounded by a sea of reporters, I felt a sense of closure. Fernando clapped me on the back, his face beaming with pride. You did it, brother, he said. It's finally over. But as we drove away from the courthouse, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in my life. The funeral home was quiet, save for the soft murmur of hushed conversations and the occasional sniffle. I stood before my father's casket, my hand resting on its polished surface. The weight of loss pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. I'm sorry, Dad, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I wish I could have protected you from all this, but I promise I'll make things right. The events of the past few weeks flashed through my mind, the betrayal, the attacks, the courtroom drama. It had all proven too much for my father's heart. Now here I was, saying goodbye to the man who had always been my rock. Fernando approached, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. He was proud of you, Luther. Never forget that. I nodded, unable to speak. The lump in my throat threatened to choke me. As the service began, I took my place in the front row. The pastor's words washed over me, but I barely heard them. My mind was elsewhere, replaying memories of my father, his stern but fair guidance, his unwavering support, his disappointment in Trevor. Trevor. The thought of my brother sent a surge of anger through me. He wasn't here, of course he was rotting in a jail cell where he belonged, but the damage he'd done was irreparable. After the service, as people filed past to offer their condolences, I spotted a familiar face. Virginia, Trevor's estranged wife, stood at the back of the room, uncertainty written across her features. Our eyes met, and I motioned for her to approach. Luther, I'm so sorry for your loss, she said, her voice trembling. I took a deep breath, pushing aside my personal feelings. Thank you for coming, Virginia. How are the kids? She looked down, her shoulders slumping. They're struggling. It's been hard explaining everything to them. I nodded, understanding the impossible situation she was in. Listen, Virginia, I know things have been difficult. I want you to know that I'm here to help, whatever you and. The kids need education, a place to live. Anything, just say the word. Her eyes widened in surprise. Luther, I don't know what to say after everything Trevor did. You and the kids didn't deserve any of this, I said firmly. I'm just doing what's right. My father would have wanted me to take care of family, regardless of the circumstances. Tears welled up in Virginia's eyes. Thank you, Luther. You have no idea what this means to us. As she walked away, Fernando reappeared at my side. That was a good thing you did there, brother, I sighed, feeling the weight of my new responsibilities settling on my shoulders. It's what needs to be done. Those kids shouldn't suffer for their father's mistakes. The rest of the day passed in a blur of handshakes and murmured condolences. By the time the last mourner left, I felt drained, both physically and emotionally. Standing alone in the empty funeral home, I looked at my father's portrait one last time. I'll make you proud, Dad, I whispered. I promise. The recruitment office was bustling with activity, young men and women filled with a mix of excitement and nervousness, milling about, filling out forms, and chatting with recruiters. I sat in a hard plastic chair, my own completed paperwork clutched in my hand. Fernando, already in his uniform, sat beside me. You sure about this, Luther, he asked, his voice low. I nodded, my resolve firm. I need this, Fernando, a fresh start. A chance to do something meaningful. He clapped me on the shoulder, a grin spreading across his face. Well then, welcome to the family, brother. The Army will give you a fresh start, all right? And you'll have a new family that's always got your back. My name was called, and I stood, handing over my paperwork to the recruiter. As I signed the final documents after passing the physical and written tests, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. This was a new chapter, a chance to rebuild myself. The next few months were a blur of basic training, push-ups, and drill sergeants barking orders. It was hard, grueling work, but I threw myself into it with everything I had. The physical exertion helped quiet the demons in my mind, and the camaraderie of my fellow recruits began to fill the void left by betrayal and loss. Years passed, and I found myself rising through the ranks. Fernando and I served side by side, facing challenges and dangers that made my past troubles seem trivial. We were brothers in arms now, our bond forged in the crucible of combat and shared hardship. On our last tour, we found ourselves pinned down by enemy fire. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of gunpowder. I looked over at Fernando, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. "Just like old times, huh?" I yelled over the din of battle. He grinned back, reloading his weapon. "Never a dull moment with you around, Luther," as we provided covering fire for our squad to advance. I realized how far I'd come. The man I was before betrayed, angry, lost seemed like a stranger now. The army had given me purpose, discipline, and a sense of belonging I thought I'd lost forever. After what felt like hours, the skirmish finally ended. As the dust settled, Fernando and I sat against a crumbling wall, catching our breath. "You know," Fernando said, his voice thoughtful, "I think it's time we considered retiring. We're not getting any younger, and I've got a feeling there's more out there for us." I nodded, surprised to find that the idea didn't fill me with dread. "You might be right. We've done our part. Maybe it's time to see what civilian life has to offer," Fernando chuckled. "Look at you, all grown up and ready to face the real world." I punched his arm playfully. "Couldn't have done it without you, brother." "I've learned so much from you, Fernando. I don't know how I would have made it through without your friendship." His expression softened. "You're like a brother to me, Luther." We've both come a long way. As we sat there, the sounds of the battlefield fading around us, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. Whatever came next, I knew I was ready to face it. The coffee shop was busy, the aroma of freshly ground beans filling the air. I sat at a small table, nervously tapping my fingers against my cup. It had been months since I'd retired from the army, and civilian life still felt strange and unfamiliar. The bell above the door chimed, and I looked up to see her walking Kristen Vargas, Fernando's sister. We'd met a few times over the years, but this was different. This was a date. She spotted me and smiled, making her way through the crowded shop. "Luther," she said warmly, taking the seat across from me. "It's good to see you again." I returned her smile, feeling a flutter of nervousness in my stomach. "You too, Kristen. Thanks for agreeing to meet me." As we talked, I found myself opening up in a way I hadn't in years. Kristen listened intently, her eyes full of understanding and compassion. "You've been through so much, Luther," she said softly, reaching across the table to take my hand. "I see the strength in you, and I want to be a part of your journey." Her touch sent a jolt through me, awakening feelings I thought were long buried. "I never thought I'd find love again, Kristen," I admitted, "but with you, it feels like I'm finally home." Our relationship blossomed over the following months. Kristen's warmth and understanding helped me confront the lingering shadows of my past. With her by my side, I found the courage to fully embrace this new chapter of my life. On a crisp autumn day, surrounded by our closest friends and family, Kristen and I exchanged vows. As I slipped the ring onto her finger, I felt a sense of peace and rightness that I'd never experienced before. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe," I told her later that night as we swayed together during our first dance. "I'm ready to build something real, something lasting." Kristen's eyes shimmered with tears of joy. "We'll build it together, Luther, every step of the way." As the years passed, our family grew. The sound of children's laughter filled our home, chasing away the last lingering ghosts of my past. I threw myself into fatherhood with the same dedication I'd once given to the military, determined to pass on the values my father had instilled in me. One evening, as I sat on our back porch watching the sunset, Kristen joined me, wrapping her arms around my shoulders. "Penny, for your thoughts?" she asked. I smiled, covering her hand with mine. "Just reflecting on the journey. Life has tested me in ways I never imagined, but through it all, I've learned that the only way forward is with strength, honor, and the courage to start anew." Kristen kissed my cheek. "And look at where it's brought you. Look at what you've built." As if on cue, our children's laughter rang out from inside the house. I felt my heart swell with love and gratitude. "You're right," I said, pulling Kristen closer. "This is everything I never knew I wanted, and I wouldn't change a thing." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink, I felt a profound sense of peace. The darkness of my past had faded, replaced by the warmth of love and the promise of a bright future. I had emerged from the crucible of betrayal and loss, not broken, but stronger and wiser. And as I sat there, surrounded by the family I had built, I knew that this moment, this life was the greatest victory of all. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.